Hello. In this video we'll talk about the floating points. Okay, so what is the floating point? Floating point is a number that is a real number, and usually the floating point is the number that has a decimal value or decimal point. For example, 98.6, that's a floating point. Okay, 0.0001, that's another floating point. It could be also a negative number. How can we read the floating points? So we saw that we use them. We know how they look like. How can we read them? We know that if we read something from the user, we always read it as a string. Same thing happened with the integers. We read them as the strings, but then we converted them to integers. How can we do that with the floating point? We do the same thing. We have a special function that is built-in function. It calls float. So when you read the input from the user and then you convert it with the float function, this number or this input that is entered by the user is going to be treated as a floating point. Okay. So it basically when it comes to the reading, you want to convert it. But when it comes to printing the floating point, you can print it straightforward. You don't have to do any conversion for that. Okay. So let's take a look at PyCharm, idle, and use some examples over here. Okay. So let me say, for example, x equal input, and then I'm going to show you here, enter a number. Okay, and then I'm gonna hit return, and this is I'm using the script, I'm using the shell. Sorry, I'm not writing a script, I'm using the shell, the interpreter. It's gonna ask me enter a number. Whatever I input over here is gonna be stored in X. So let me say 2.5. It's stored in X. Now let me say print X. It printed 2.5. It looks it's 2.5, but in reality it's still string. I will show you why. If I say, for example, z equal to x plus 1, you would expect that z is going to be 3.5. But look what's going to happen. It told me it's not correct, because guess what? I have two different values. One of them is integer, the other one is string. I need to convert one of them. Okay. So in this case, what I'm going to do, I'm going to say x equal to float, okay, and between parentheses x. So I'm saying convert the x, make it a float. Okay. Now I'm going to repeat z equal to x plus 1. You see, it worked. Python liked it. And now I'm going to say print what is the value of z, and printed out 3.5. So that's exactly what we need to do. Okay. Also, floating point is very helpful when it comes to scientific notations. You know, there is a lot of numbers, like in scientific notations, there's a lot of numbers that could be very, very big. So with the floating point, we will be able to convert this large number, like this number over here, into scientific notation, such as 6.02 times 10 to the power 23, which will be, it's going to look like that, 6.202 E23, which is E stands for the exponents. Okay. The question is right now, we saw two different types of numbers. We saw integers, we saw floating points. The question is, when do we use integers and when do we use floating points? That's very important in questions. At the beginning, you will notice that I will tell you probably in some of the programming assignment, this should be an integer, this one should be a floating point. But in the future, you need to understand when do you use which. Okay, so usually we use floating point when we try to represent some type of quantities that will be measured, such as you try to measure the temperature or try to measure the distance. For example, the distance from your house to CNU is, let's say, 56 miles, 0.3 or something. Okay. When you try to measure the weight, okay, you use a floating point. What about the integers? Integer, we use them when we try to count something. For example, the number of cars, number of students, number of credit hours you're taking, number of cities you have visited. You cannot say, for example, I visited 2.5 cities. it doesn't count this way. Okay. For example, how many hours? I have 5 hours. How many minutes? You see, it's something that you count. Okay, so that's very important to figure out which type of numbers that you should use. Okay, here's a practice, a program practice. I want you to think about it this way, and there's another practice also. I'm gonna solve that in the following video, but I want you to think about it first. So let's take a look at this program first. This one says write a program in Python that calculates the perimeter of a rectangle, and I gave you the equation. It's equal to 2 times length plus the width. Okay, so you need to ask the user for the length, ask the user for the width, and then you plug them into this equation, and then you print out the result. Okay, I'm going to show you that in the following video. Also, there's something important over here I'm going to talk about. When you use floating point, sometimes the result comes with a lot of numbers after the decimal point. How can I limit that number? Well, you can limit it by using some type of formatting for the printing. Okay, so for example, if you are trying to print the average based on your calculations, but the average is going to have 3-4 different numbers after the decimal points, or digits after the decimal points. You don't want that many. You just want 2 decimal numbers or 2 digits after the decimal point. You can specify it by using this type of format, percentage sign, 0.2 to present how many digits gonna be after the decimal point, and F stands for float, and that's gonna be between quotation marks. Okay, and after that, right away, there's no comma, there's nothing. You have a percentage sign, and then between parentheses the variable that is gonna go here. Okay, and then it's gonna give you the result printed with 2 digits after the decimal point. Okay, so I can show you something over here. I'm going to go over here. So let's say x equal to 3.5432, 1. And then if I say print x, is going to print it this way. If I say print, and over here between 2 quotation marks, either double or single, they're going to work. Percentage sign, I'm going to say 0.2, give me 2 digits after the decimal points of this float number. And then after that, I'm going to have, after the outside the quotation mark, I'm going to have a percentage sign, and between parentheses, you open it, you close it every time. I'm going to say the variable name, which is x, and hit return is going to give you the value of x, but with only 2 digits after the decimal point. If you want to have it 3 digits after the decimal point, you change 2 to 3, and so on and so forth. Okay, there is another problem I want you also to think about it, but you can see the videos, the following videos when I solve it. I'm going to use PyCharm to solve these 2 problems. Okay, so this one, it says like driving is expensive. Write a program with a car's miles per gallon and gas dollar per gallon, both floats. You see, I gave you the floats. I told you both floats. Sometimes I'm not going to give you anything like that. You need to figure it out, okay, as an input. So you need to ask the user first, enter the car's miles per gallon, and then you enter the gas dollar per gallon. And that's the user input. These 2 numbers, the user input. Your program should output these values. Per 100 miles, how much, and per 50 miles, how much it's going to be. And here I give you a hint to do the calculations. Think about it, take a look at it, and then watch the following video when I solve these 2 problems.